Good morning. I titled this to Family and Friends, and I eventually will probably put this in a format that we can actually share a little bit. And I guess before I start, thank you. Thank you very much to everyone who has cared for us. And our reasons for doing this, first off, we ask for grace for perhaps inadequate updates, and we are deliberately not ignoring you when you text. It's just sometimes we don't know what to say or even how to say it. I was looking over the church hotlines that we sent out this past week, and it looks a little bit like a roller coaster. He's doing well. We need prayer. He's doing better. We need prayer. And if it looked like a roller coaster there, I can assure you it was much worse in person. And even in this, what I call a report, I'm trying to keep it factual and the storyline moving along. So we ask for grace. We are human, and we are not perfect at that. Part of this, I think, is not so much just to put our story out there, but I think you guys deserve to know. Because a lot of the questions we got is, what's going on, and how do you get there from pneumonia? Pneumonia is usually outpatient, right? Like, you shouldn't end up where we are with just pneumonia. I think Ruth can attest to that. It's good to see you here this morning. So how did we get to where we are? So Ellis started with a cough, and I'm going to start, and I'll try to keep this moving. Ellis started with a cough several weeks ago, a few days after Easter, actually. And Ellis lived with this cough for several weeks, and as it worsened, and it kept getting worse, and it kept settling down in, but he's just about like any one of us. As a healthy young male, he's not going to the doctor. It'll pass. And there was actually a cough in the area as well at the time. It was kind of going around. This is par for course. Ellis finally went to the walk-in clinic on Thursday afternoon a week and a half ago, May 8th, because he was just feeling so poorly. They took x-rays and sent them off for analysis and sent him home. Thursday evening, after going to the walk-in, he started experiencing chest pain and could not sleep well that night, and then decided to go back into the walk-in clinic the very next morning, Friday morning, and that by that point they had his x-ray results back at that time, and he was diagnosed, or diagnosed isn't the proper word, they saw that he had pneumonia. He was prescribed antibiotics and sent home. Pretty standard. Friday morning, afternoon, he actually stayed home from work again because he was coughing really hard and having difficulty breathing deeply. He couldn't breathe. By Friday afternoon, he was experiencing muscle spasms all along with the above symptoms, and was in a tremendous amount of pain. His body was just racking, and muscles were seizing on him. Diener took him to the ER Friday evening, and they drew labs, did an x-ray, and did a CT scan, and they started him on morphine right away at this point to ease his pain. It was discovered that he had a pleural effusion on his left lung. This fluid is on the left side of his chest, and because of his pain levels, he was admitted for the evening. Causes of a pleural effusion, there are multiple reasons for a pleural effusion, but we are currently believing it is, our current belief is it was caused by his bad cough the past couple weeks. His lung was essentially, every time he was coughing, it was rubbing, and eventually it rubbed through, and that's what led to the fluid, and that can sometimes lead to that. It caused an abrasion and hence the fluid. Saturday morning at the hospital, it was determined via x-ray the fluid had reached a point where a chest tube would need to be inserted into the lung cavity to help drain the fluid, and they do that through your back. And they basically drill a hole between your ribs and put a tube in. Still nothing extremely out of the ordinary yet at this point. This chest tube was put in Saturday afternoon, and fluid started draining out. And at this point, Ellis was expected to spend around 2 to 3 days in the hospital while his chest tube was in until it could be removed and he would be released to go home. And note, at this point, baby Elliot nor Elijah or Annabelle were allowed up to his room just because they've got a lot of disease there at the hospital, and that's understand. This complicated Christy's life as well, as she needed to feed Elliot regularly. So Bob spent Saturday night with Ellis at that point. Saturday evening and Sunday were quite painful for him, and he was in tremendous amounts of pain with very little rest or sleep possible. He actually declined any visitors to see him as he was just too uncomfortable and didn't want to see anybody to see him like that. By Sunday afternoon, they had his pain levels down somewhat, but it still hurt to breathe. I spent Sunday night with him, and he told me he could actually feel the chest tube against his lung every time he breathed. It would just rake as he breathed, and he was in a lot of pain. Sunday night was mostly uneventful, other than Ellis not getting much sleep at all, again, due to the lack of his breathing, and he couldn't take deep breaths. Monday, Christy was able to spend the day with him. She was also up there, obviously. Most days she's up there every day, but Monday, Christy was able to spend the full day with him pretty much, and the fluid output from his chest had slowed considerably. Monday night, James spent the night with Ellis again, and it was a mostly sleepless night again. He was restless, but his pain levels were mostly under control for the most part at that point. There was even talk of him potentially being released Tuesday evening to go home. And note, Ellis was beyond exhausted at this point. There was no real measurable rest since he went to the walk-in the previous evening 5 nights previous, before this. His chest tube was no longer sucking any fluid out at all Tuesday, but they left it in with the plan to take it out on Wednesday. It was determined that he would spend Tuesday night in the hospital and focus only on getting rest. I went up Tuesday afternoon and planned to spend the night with him. Getting his body rest was the main focus going into Tuesday night. He was still restless and was prescribed a mild sleeping pill to start the evening at 8 p.m. with the idea to increase the dosages every hour until he was able to fall asleep. At 8:30 p.m. he was still restless and his heart rate had climbed slightly. We gave him a much stronger dose at 9 p.m. and his heart rate kept climbing and he could not hold still at all. He just couldn't hold still. His heart rate was climbing quite high. He kept telling me he was not getting enough oxygen, but he was on oxygen, just like a nasal tube, and his levels were high enough, so I kept telling him just to lay back down and go to sleep. His heart rate was in the 130s by this point. For those of you that know, a normal resting heart rate should be between 60 and 80, and he was almost double that. Nurse said she did not like it at all and would consult with ICU doctors, though by this point it was about 10 o'clock. By 10, his heart rate was well into the 140s. ICU doctors showed up and checked him over and looked at his chest tube, which was no longer draining, and ordered a bedside x-ray right away. The bedside x-ray was taken and showed his lung was 60% full of fluid and were all stuffed to the top. All his lungs were stuffed to the top of his chest cavity. He was essentially suffocating. His heart rate was in the 150s by this point, and he was drenched in sweat. Note, apparently at some point his chest tube had clotted over and was no longer draining properly. It was not noticed at all on the Tuesday because no fluid was expected. He was expected to be out of fluid and getting better. He was supposed to be dried up, and no fluid output was normal. Once it was determined his chest tube was blocked, we started working on opening that again. A nasal tube was actually shoved down his nose into his stomach to relieve any potential air there, to allow the fluid to come down, essentially, out of his stomach down, to allow his lungs room to breathe. And we did struggle, but we were able to get his chest tube opened up, and we drained 2 liters of fluid off of him in a very short order of time. But then his heart rate spiked to a little over 170. I think I saw 174, 175 at a couple points there. And his body temp went from 98 to 104 within about 10 minutes. He started crashing. His oxygen levels also started tanking quite fast. He was on full oxygen at that point. They had actually put in he wasn't, I know the medical people will ask, but no, he was not, a tube wasn't put in at that point yet. But his oxygen levels were falling. At one point I looked up and I counted 8 medical staff in his room around his bed. As I understand, they did not readily have bed space in the ICU, but the level of care he received over this time was excellent. He had 2 ICU doctors. They both stayed by his bed for well over 2 hours straight and kept coming back and checking on him throughout the night. Fears were that he was becoming septic at this point, as he had been on strong antibiotics already, and they clearly were not working, and septic would be which at point, antibiotics don't work and your body actually starts destroying itself. I do not mean to be dramatic, but there were points I did not expect him to live through the night, Tuesday night. And while I was the only one in the hospital with Ellis that night, Christy and Diener were together, and the rest of the family were awake all night as I tried to keep them updated on what was happening. At one point, Dinah had a coworker from her floor come down to give a more medical report to her, as I just didn't understand at all what I was seeing, only that it was not good at all. By 2 a.m., he still had a fever, and his heart rate was still really high, but he had mostly stabilized at that point, and he actually fell asleep for a couple hours. Diener relieved me Wednesday morning, and I came home, and that's when the first church hotline went out. I think Brad said something yesterday or last Sunday that he was in the hospital, but this was the first church hotline that went out requesting prayer and his move to the ICU. I know that hotline did not express the severity of the night, but honestly, I wasn't sure how to put it into words, and we were all beyond exhausted. We went to Ellis potentially being discharged in the morning to him almost dying within a few short hours. How do you say that? Wednesday morning, he still had a high heart rate, but had mostly stabilized, we thought, and we thought we'd figured it out. Between 8 and 10 a.m. Wednesday morning, his chest tube started dispensing blood and reached 700 milliliters output in that short time frame. He was also pale, short of breath, had excessive sweating. I think diaphoretic is a medical term for that. He was moved into intensive care at this point. Now, to be clear, I am not a doctor, nor do I profess to be one, but this is how it was explained to me, and it makes sense, and so I will convey that to you. If you have a medical background and I'm hilariously wrong, I apologize. But fears were his lungs that essentially had fluid on them so long that they had essentially coated over. Like a membrane starts covering the lung, and it makes it rigid, and then the lung isn't able to operate the way it should. And this lining would need to be stripped off via surgery. And his vitals were also digressing at this point as well Wednesday morning, and emergency surgery was determined to be necessary by 10 a.m. Wednesday morning. And that is when the church hotline went out again, announcing his immediate need for surgery. This surgery was going to be done one of two ways. Either they could get in laparoscopically and remove what they needed to hopefully it was just only a portion, because that's where the blood was coming from, and hopefully they could get in there and just remove a portion of it, or they would need to cut him open thoracally, or however you say that, but basically they slice him open like a fish, and they go in there and manually scrape his lungs, the stuff off his lungs. The latter comes with a lot of risk, permanent lung damage, and then also a pretty high fear of passing that infection to other parts of his body with him opened up like that. We were very, very concerned about him becoming septic at this point. That's just to name a few. Our preference at this point was to have him flown down to Barnes in St. Louis for this surgery, as they are more specialized in this area. But with his condition as it was, we did not have time for that. While they turned over the operating room to prepare for his surgery, his vitals started improving. Meanwhile, Diana was getting the, quote, wheels greased for a potential trip to Barnes Hospital. Side note here, Diana was invaluable advocating for Ellis. Wednesday morning, he was moved right into Diana's normal ICU work area, and her everyday co-workers were working on her brother. As Ellis said after moving there, Diana has her little army all lined up, just real busy working on him. But that's also her worst nightmare, is having an immediate family member in her work area. When surgery was ready for him, he had stabilized at that point where they actually downgraded his emergency status for surgery. He improved. And he actually kept improving all morning, which I shouldn't say improving, he stabilized, which is why surgery time kept getting bumped. Originally, it was going to be immediately at 10 a.m. Then they said, maybe we can go to 11. Then they said 1. Then they said 2, and then 2:30. We tried to keep you updated, but what do you do at that point? His condition was stable all day Wednesday, and so they kept bumping his surgery because they actually downgraded him to a Class B, I think it was, which moves him further down the list as far as immediate. Also, I made a note here, Ellis was quite concerned that his prayer warriors know exactly what time he goes into surgery. So that's when he did go into surgery, actually, is when we sent that last hotline Wednesday night, I believe it was. By this point, we also had everything ready for his flight to Barnes, and he could be flown out and in surgery down there within just a few hours if needed. Also note, Elijah and Annabelle did receive special permission to go back and see Ellis before surgery around this time. By Wednesday evening, they decided to undergo surgery at Carl laparoscopically and go in and take a look, with the understanding that if he did indeed need to be opened up and cut open, they would just close him back up and fly him straight down to Barnes and put him in surgery there immediately. That was where we were at by Wednesday night. They did go in, and his lungs were not coated as they had feared. They were essentially just covered in pus and infection and not doing, obviously, what they were supposed to. They were, and again, not a medical term, if you can just work with me as a shop guy, they took a pressure washer, they washed his lungs off, took a shot back, and sucked it out, okay? That's what makes sense to me. That's as I understood how they somewhat did it, probably not medically like that, but they went in and his lungs were not coated over as they feared. They were able to rinse them off, clean them up, and have a very actual safe, easy surgery. Laparoscopic anymore. It's almost outpatient. I don't take that lightly. I credit his improvement all day Wednesday to his rather low-risk surgery Wednesday evening to only one thing: people praying and God moving. Ellis came out of surgery around 10 p.m. Wednesday evening and was quite groggy and disoriented. Christy and Christine were able to spend the rest of the night with him. He was quite restless and did not sleep at all again Wednesday night and was in a decent amount of pain. Thursday, his oxygen levels improved, and they got him moving and got him to actually walk a little bit, but he was still quite disoriented and restless. Thursday evening, the plan was to get him to rest. I went up to spend the night with him and was able to walk with him around the nurse's station around 9. At this point, it was worth noting that Ellis has not really slept at all, any real measurable amount, for well over a week, and has been in almost constant pain, and he's been pumped full of narcotics. The doctor said it is common that what he went through to be disoriented and confused coming out of surgery, but they did not want him to get his days and nights switched around at this point. So they were going to keep him awake on Thursday, and Thursday night we are going to put him out, and he is going to sleep Thursday night. He did not sleep at all Thursday night. He was restless, hyperactive, could not hold still, constantly moving his hands, and just couldn't relax, and his heart rate was still up. The other concern at this point was that some of his labs were starting to come back abnormal. Levels were not where they should be and were climbing. There were /are indications that something else may be happening somewhere in his body that we're not aware of yet. Logically, they could sedate him to help him rest, but your body will actually, as I understand, naturally fight to stay awake if it's fighting something life-threatening or any life-threatening condition. And there was concern that if we sedate him, if there is something that we are missing, it will kill him while we have him sedated. So the idea was we're getting into Friday morning now. By Friday morning, Ellis was worsening. He would keep his eyes open and was able to look at us, but had lost his ability to speak and follow basic verbal commands. Friday, a full lab workup was scheduled, and a full-body CT scan was ordered to go through his body with a fine-toothed comb to attempt to find what we were missing. CT scans came back clear, while his labs still show inconsistencies that are slightly concerning. It was determined finally to sedate him yesterday afternoon. And I did put a note in here. It is quite disconcerting to know that there may be something wrong and you just can't find it. Saturday morning, he was allowed to wake, and he was able to sit up and was coherent for a couple hours before slowly becoming disoriented again. Another lab workup was drawn again, and then he was sedated again. We still don't know. That was yesterday morning. We still don't know entirely what we are facing. Maybe it is nothing. That a lot of sleep won't fix. We just don't know. Ellis is still in the ICU at this point, but his vitals are stable and his lungs are responding as well as can be expected at this point. His lab reports are still showing some areas of concern, and numbers we don't like to see are still climbing. We do not understand, but we do trust in God's plan. He was able to rest last night, and as of this morning, I think he was actually eating a breakfast, which is good to see. And yeah. Thank you for your prayer and your support. Don't stop. For the text messages, the flowers, the meals, the babysitting, doing yard work, words, and saying thank you seems inadequate. It has been a long week, and we are exhausted. I put that mildly. But we have felt your prayers, and God is working. And as I said before, God has been faithful before. He will be faithful still and again. Thank you. This is Jerry Diener on behalf of the Diener family. Thank you.